present For the Record.
Good morning and welcome to For the Record. I'm Naomi Coles. As nearly 13,000 Afghan refugees prepare for resettlement while living temporarily at Fort McCoy, a legal team from the University of Wisconsin specializing in immigration law is about to head their way. Thousands of refugees there are either eligible for special immigrant visas for those who helped the U.S. government, or they're here on humanitarian parole. I'm joined by the team's director and UW professor, Erin Barbado. Erin, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Why don't we begin by describe for me a little bit about what your team is going to be doing there at Fort McCoy?
Well, at Fort McCoy, there is a legal clinic that is run by the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. And they are having certain volunteer attorneys coming there to work with the people from Afghanistan who need information about their legal advice. So I'm planning to go with a few of my students to help support their efforts and provide legal information and orientation to the people from Afghanistan.
Now, you may not have all the particulars to answer this question, but what do you expect that your day-to-day is going to look like there once you get there?
Well, I've been there before, just by myself. I haven't brought the students with me yet. But when I went, what we did was work in basically a trailer and meet with people who had questions about their legal status in the United States, where we talked about their journey to the United States and what their future might hold in order to remain here in the United States and hopefully have a pathway to citizenship.
Let's start there. I touched briefly in the introduction about those two different pathways, at least different legal statuses available right now. What does the pathway to citizenship look like for refugees at the fort?
Well, it depends on their status. And so when we talk about refugees, it's very different than when we talk about someone who maybe is here in the United States on a different status, but seeking refuge. So there's a difference between refugee status as well as asylee status, as well as what many of the people from Afghanistan are in the process of applying for, which is called special immigrant visa. These are all categories where people under our laws are eligible to receive protection in the United States, because we don't want to turn away anybody who would be persecuted in their home country. But it's very complicated for the people from Afghanistan right now because it's unclear what their pathway will be to citizenship.
I want to specifically ask about humanitarian parole. What does it look like to even get a visa on that pathway right now, given just our current administration, given Congress, what the legislation is right now? What does that look like?
Well, for everybody outside of the United States who's not a U.S. citizen or a lawful permanent resident, you need to have a visa and a passport in order to gain admission to the United States. So if someone is outside of the United States hoping to get here to have refuge, they either have to go through the asylum process or the refugee process. There is an option for certain people from Afghanistan to apply for humanitarian parole outside of the United States and then enter the United States on that humanitarian parole. But the process is incredibly complicated, just like everything in our immigration system. And when someone has already fled their country because of an emergent situation and because of fear of persecution, their future of getting into the United States is incredibly complicated, because obtaining that actual visa in their passport is beyond complicated at this time.
What do you expect the biggest challenges for you and your team are going to be while you're there?
I mean, working with people who have suffered trauma and have been evacuated from their country and left the only life that they've known, I think it's incredibly difficult to work with people in this situation, because oftentimes we don't have all of the information that they need, especially in the status of people from Afghanistan right now, because there's a lot of gray area in what their pathways will be to citizenship and whether there really will be a pathway to citizenship for them, the pathway to citizenship that our government had promised them for aiding and helping our government in Afghanistan.
And I want to finish up here. I was actually speaking to a refugee, an Afghan journalist who I interviewed for a story a couple weeks ago now, and I was speaking with her actually just today, and she was expressing to me all these concerns about she doesn't know how long she's going to be there. She doesn't know what her status even is yet, and she has all these questions that she doesn't feel are answered. So for people like her who may not know what their status is, what is kind of the longest timeline we might be looking at before they can get some kind of clarity before they can leave?
Well, most of the people that I've met with and most of the people that have evacuated Afghanistan would be eligible to apply for asylum under our laws, because they fled their home country and are unwilling and unable to return because of fear of persecution based on their political opinion or possibly what's called a particular social group. But as many people know, the asylum system in the United States is broken. It can take 3 to 4 to 5 years to someone to go through the process to actually receive their asylee status and then be on a pathway to citizenship. It often takes talking to having a hearing in front of an asylum officer or even an immigration judge. And it can be an incredibly difficult process for people, especially for people that we promised a different outcome in their legal process here in the United States.
All right. Well, Erin, thank you so much for taking the time today. And we look forward to following up with you later to learn more about your work there.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. Thanks so much for your work.
Absolutely. When we come back, hear from refugees on the base and come along for the media's first tour inside Fort McCoy. That was earlier this week.